Hello and welcome to USA 2024 On the Road. With me, James Matthews, in a hotel room currently in Mar-a-Lago, Florida.
Me, Martha Kelner, here in Sky News HQ in Washington, D.C.
And me, Mark Stone, also here in Washington.
Yeah, I'm in this hotel in Mar-a-Lago because it gives us a balcony view of Mar-a-Lago. Clearly, we're staying in Florida waiting to see what he will say next. I'm looking at the TV, or was earlier on, and I saw CNN, and I thought, that's a familiar backdrop. They're clearly in the same hotel. And then I flicked over, and there's another network broadcaster in exactly the same place. So that is our life for the next 4 years.
Well, 4 years to come, but I hear the hotel's quite posh, James, so that's all right.
Well, it's not like us. But Eleanor, our producer, not half an hour ago said, as we were about to edit, do you need a chair or are you happy with the chaise longue?
What was the answer?
Oh, chaise longue, clearly.
Well, look, we must get going because I've got to get to the White House and you've got to eat your lobster rolls, I hear.
Trade secrets. As the dust settles from Donald Trump's historic victory, both sides are starting to think about what comes next. For Trump and his team, they'll be looking ahead to what they can achieve in 4 years. For Kamala Harris and the Democrats, there's likely to be some serious soul-searching over what went so wrong in their campaign. So I suppose it's a good moment for us to do some reflecting as well on our last year or so when we've been covering the campaigns. It's certainly been eventful. There were assassination attempts. And there were giveaways.
$1 million every day from now until the election.
There were gaffes, too.
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
Floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
If I had to push you, what for you has been the most decisive moment in this election? Mark, you go first.
Well, the assassination attempt, which I just think was extraordinary because of the way Donald Trump reacted to it. And I think actually when the dust settles, I think that defiance in that moment kind of framed his campaign from that moment forward. The way he recognized the moment he was in, can hear him trying to control the moment, trying to tell his security team, just let me do this. And then he looked at the cameras, looked at the crowd, put his hand in the air, and that fist of defiance. I think it resonated across the country because people saw a different side of Donald Trump. They saw a defiance that I think appealed perhaps to people who weren't necessarily drawn to him quite as much before. It pulled him over the line, I think, because they saw in that a leader, maybe, and they saw a fighter. And I think in an America where they haven't seen Joe Biden really as a strong man, as a powerful person, they saw that in Donald Trump.
And what about you, Martha?
It's obviously hard to pick one. It's been the most extraordinary election campaign. What struck me this week is thinking back to a year ago, and I'm sure you guys remember this, we were planning our holidays around potential court cases for Donald Trump. We all thought this was going to be Donald Trump potentially running his election campaign from a jail cell. We thought that those were going to be the pivotal moments of this election, those 4 criminal cases. There obviously was that one case with Stormy Daniels and the hush money, 34 felony convictions. But that was just a subplot really to this election. And I think the moment that stands out for me most of all was that debate, the debate that ended up being the end of Joe Biden. I watched that from my sofa at home in LA, and you know that those debates are going to be a big moment, but I think 5 minutes in, it really did feel like this is pivotal. This is going to be something that changes everything. He came on his voice hoarse, losing track of what he was saying. There was that moment where he said, we finally beat Medicare, a misspeak that went viral online. And I think at that point it became clear, not just to the watching public, but to senior figures within the Democratic Party, that his position was untenable. And that obviously changed the entire course of the race.
Yeah, that debate night, I remember we were in Atlanta, I was covering, it was in the spin room. We had an idea that we'd go to a bar, a watch party where people were watching it, just to get kind of people's reactions. Manuel's Tavern, it was called in Atlanta. We put the wrong Manuel's into the sat-nav. So we ended up, myself and Ed, the cameraman, across town, and the debate had already started. So that was a big pressure. It was an even bigger pressure when I got a text from Emily Purser-Brown, our bureau chief, who was in this place watching the debate. And the text read, "I think Biden's lost the election already."
That's your Four Seasons landscaping moment, James.
There'll never be another Four Seasons landscaping. We've spoken to hundreds of people between us as we've crisscrossed the states during our coverage of the election. Do you think you got a sense of what really did matter to voters here?
Well, I've done a lot of reporting on reproductive rights, and as a result of that, I spoke to a lot of people for whom abortion was their biggest motivating factor when they went to the ballot box. I think what's actually been borne out is that wasn't quite the big vote winner that the Democrats expected it to be. I think they focused on abortion and democracy when actually the biggest factor for voters was immigration and the economy. And in fact, I went to Michigan a few weeks before the election, and we spoke to people working in sort of car repair shops there, mechanics and that sort of thing, people going and picking up spare tyres. And actually, to a man, they all said the most important thing for them was the economy. And when they're talking about the economy, they're not talking about what Biden was saying, until he's blue in the face, about inflation being under control and unemployment being down. They're talking about the economy as it matters to them, and that was supermarket prices and petrol prices, and they felt like they were better off under Donald Trump. Whether that is accurate or not, that is the perception, and ultimately that's why the Democrats and Kamala Harris paid for it on election night.
For me, I think the bro vote, there was much talk about that, wasn't there? And how Donald Trump was targeting that demographic that felt disengaged, left behind, particularly in the key states, the Rust Belt, where manufacturing industry has been in decline over decades. Young white males who find it hard to get a hold in life, for whom there was prosperity in the past, but they feel this sense of having been left behind. That's the kind of thing that you read about, you hear about from campaigners. I think it's only when you actually hear it from the horse's mouth that you realize that actually that is a thing. For me, it was the last day of campaigning outside the Santander Arena in Reading, Pennsylvania. There were three young white guys, looked, very well-to-do, and they were adamant that, in fact, in the words of one of them, they had been kicked.
We've been left behind. We've been kicked down, as Oliver Anthony put it, and they're kicking us while we're down. Yeah, it's men, or white men in particular, are just seen as the worst of the worst for whatever
white Christian
reason.
men for sure.
No, that was interesting for me. I mean, that was young white guys telling me that their opportunities had been in reverse over time. They had difficulty getting scholarships, getting into college. They felt just a sense of being disconnected from society, or a society that worked for them, and they wanted change. And clearly in this election, Harris wasn't seen as the change candidate Trump very much was.
He harnessed that anger, didn't he, as well, with young white male voters. He almost made his grievances their grievances. He was saying, I'm just like you, I'm an outsider too, and we're going to stick it to the liberal elites. And I think that message landed. And I think one of the real smart moves in sort of the closing weeks of the campaign was that appearance that he did on the Joe Rogan podcast that has 46 million odd listeners. And I know from speaking to my male friends here in America that they listened to it. A lot of them listened to the whole 3 hours of it. And what I heard from them was, he seemed really human. He seemed very likable on that podcast. They didn't get that from Kamala Harris. They just didn't. They didn't get that connection. They didn't get that message.
I listened to quite a few of the, not the whole of the Joe Rogan one, but some of the other podcasts he did. And I was looking today at a list of that. He did a lot of podcasts, many of which I'd never heard of, but obviously they're big in America within certain demographics. And you're right, Martha, he was kind of like a different man on some of them. He was, talking about his life in a very different way, much more relaxed, so clever at targeting different messages, different tones, different rhetoric to different audiences. He's very good at that. It was a different Trump on the podcast, and he harnessed that and appealed to different people in different ways.
In terms of individuals you've come across and spoken to, is there any one you would pick out that stays with you?
I happened to bump into someone a figure in the tech industry, an early investor in a lot of Elon Musk's companies. And I was chatting to him. He was a lifelong Democrat voter, but he said he was voting Trump this time round because of the transgender issues, as he put it. And I think that really struck me, because actually it feels like that's a relatively small issue for a lot of people. And I think what I've read since is that the messaging that Team Trump executed on, transgender issues was just so effective. They had this advert with the tagline, "Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you." And among people who watched that advert, there was a 2.6% percentage swing towards Donald Trump. And I think what it showed is that even though this is, a minor, perhaps a non-issue for some people, they were able to show that the Democratic Party was swinging so far left and was so far out of touch. And I think that has been the case. They've lost the closeness with their base. They've lost the understanding of what really matters to working class voters.
You say they're non-issues, and I agree with you, but I'd also say that the concern that people have over this sort of catch-all phrase, wokeness, has been underestimated by the Democrats. In terms of people I've met, individuals, well, on the woke thing, we went to Michigan trying to discover whether the Gaza war was going to sway Arab Americans. And to my surprise, and that's what I love about my job, is you think you're going to go and tell one story and actually find out it's a different story. That, yes, of course, it was Gaza concerning Arab Americans in Michigan, but it was much more than that as well. They felt that this sort of leftward creep of the Democratic Party meant that the Democratic leaders in their state no longer represented their views on issues of wokeness, because they are socially conservative in that community. So that was really striking for me. A group of young black guys on a basketball court in Columbus, Georgia. I had made assumptions because Columbus is a very democratic city. And I had also made assumptions that the Democratic Party have been making for years, that young black men would be voting for Kamala Harris. To a man on this basketball court, they were all with Donald Trump. Do you know who you're going to vote for in November?
Donald Trump.
Yeah?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because he's our best choice. He's going to speak his opinion. He's going to tell you what it is.
Let me get one. Who are you going to vote for?
I ain't voting for nobody.
Yeah, I ain't voting for nobody.
No, I ain't voting.
You're not going to vote at all?
No, I ain't voting.
I seen a lot of tax breaks, and just ultimately, my company was running better.
But let's take a break for now. When we're back, we'll turn our attention to the future. What's next for Donald Trump, and what's next for Kamala Harris? Welcome back to USA 2024 on the road. Donald Trump won a resounding victory on Tuesday night. Not only did he flip Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in his favour, he looks set now to win the popular vote, something he failed to do the last time he won a presidential election.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. And frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond.
Trump will see this victory as proof that the American people support his MAGA vision for the country. But how he plans to achieve that vision is still unclear. Mark, what do you think Team Trump's priorities will be once they get into the White House in January?
I think probably number one will be immigration. It was build the wall back in 2016. That was the catchphrase, the motto. He never managed to build the complete wall, but he built large parts of it. I think he would like to continue with that. But also, more controversially, perhaps, it is, quote, the largest mass deportation program in history. That's what they're saying that they will do. I think they will run into quite a lot of legal challenges over that. But I think it is fair to say that very many migrants who are here illegally will find that their lives are made a lot harder under a Trump presidency, because that is what the majority of people in America decided, and so they will be turfed out. That will create problems with Mexico and other countries where they'll be sent back to. We know from Europe that it's very hard to send people back to a country that won't necessarily take them. So that's going to be a focus. Taxes, of course, tariffs. Taxes, he says he will lower them, but what impact will that have on national debt in America? Tariffs, that will create big tension with China, of course, and could, of course, in the short term, put up prices in America too. So could backfire on him. Plenty that he's got to do.
Martha, I wonder what you think the impact will be of a Trump presidency on abortion rights.
I think it's hard to say because Donald Trump has flip-flopped so much on abortion. Originally, he was saying, he was the architect of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which, of course, he was because he installed these conservative-leaning justices to the Supreme Court, which resulted in the overturning of that constitutional right to choose. So originally, he was celebrating that. Then he realised, or his aides realised, actually, this is not going to play so well with swing voters. So he was on the brink of suggesting a 15 to 16 week national abortion ban. He then went back on that and said, no, I'm not going to seek any national abortion ban at all. I'm going to leave it up to the original states. So I think he played a very good game on that in terms of this election. And I think probably we won't see him try to enact a national abortion ban. Having said that, his running mate, now the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, who's a conservative Catholic, he has said in the past, back in 2022, he said he would support making abortion illegal nationwide. There's also in the Project 2025 policy document, which of course Donald Trump has disowned, that suggests that they may even go further and look to ban things like mifepristone, which is one of the drugs used in the medication abortion. That would be devastating for women in this country. So I guess it's just a watching brief, really, on reproductive rights.
Just on Project 2025, it's interesting that was a document written by the Heritage Foundation. They do it every year. They have done since Reagan. It's their sort of blueprint for a conservative government. Trump, as you said, Martha, has kind of disowned it. So I haven't read it, don't know much about it. I think the truth is he does know a lot about it, and there's a lot in it that he would adopt. But it's also, I think, going to be the case that he won't adopt everything within it. Absolutely not. There's a lot in there that will not end up being government policy, either because they won't be able to implement it for one reason or another, or because actually he doesn't really agree with it. And as you say, he pivots one way or the other, or has done through the campaign, in order to try and draw people to him. So, I've spoken to officials here who claim to know a bit about what's inside Donald Trump's head, and they'll tell you that lots of that stuff from Project 2025 will not become a reality.
Right now, as we speak, he's in the house by the beach, and Donald Trump has been busy selecting the personnel of government, of course, will be one of his key tasks.
Yeah, I think those guardrails have gone now that were there 8 years ago. He is coming in with a lot of freedom, given the completeness of his control of government, likely. We know that he's considering a major role in health. We don't know what role that will be for RFK Jr. RFK Jr. was, of course, running for the presidency at one point. The Trump camp were worried he might take some of their votes away from Donald Trump. And he then went into the Trump camp. And I think the idea of him having a big role in health, Donald Trump said he would allow him to go wild on health, is a concern for some people, because RFK Jr. is one of the biggest peddler of anti-vax conspiracy theories in this country.
The journey that RFK Jr., as he's known, has had has been really very interesting. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., part of the Kennedy dynasty, but a man who fell out with quite a lot of his own family, including, it said, his own wife, about the fact that he was deciding to back Donald Trump. He is a controversial guy, as you say, Martha. He is an anti-vaxxer, and he was asked about his views on vaccines now, because clearly if he's going to be part of the White House and in a health role, then an anti-vaxxer clearly for a lot of people might be a bit of a concern, and I thought his answer was interesting.
I've never been anti-vaccine. I'm going to make sure the scientific safety studies and efficacies are out there, and people can make individual assessments about whether that product is going to be good for them.
Yeah, RFK and Elon Musk are some of the big names we're seeing bandied about. There is also a sense that it's going to be a real family affair in the White House.
In the last one, of course, it was his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner who played a really, really central role. Jared Kushner's involvement in the Middle East crisis in the last presidency was pivotal, and he was central to the Abraham Accords, which at one point people thought might be the key that would unlock the huge challenges that remain in the Middle East. Jared Kushner and Ivanka kind of disappeared into the sidelines over the course of the past 4 years. Will they make a return? I don't know. They've said that they don't want to get back into politics. We'll see. But maybe Don Jr., one of his sons, and Eric, they could have key roles as well. Donald Trump is someone who likes to keep it close in the family. And so we can expect family members and, of course, close friends, new friends like Elon Musk to be a part, one way or the other, of the new administration.
Well, that's Donald Trump, but what about Kamala Harris? After skipping her own party on election night, we heard from her for the first time on Thursday afternoon. That's when she publicly conceded the election.
The fight for our freedom will take hard work, but like I always say, we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work can be joyful work. And the fight for our country is always worth it. It is always worth it.
And the Democrats certainly have a lot of work to do to come back from a loss on this scale. Not only did Kamala Harris lose the presidential race, but the Democrats lost control of the Senate and failed to regain the House of Representatives. That means the Republican Party have control of Congress too. Mark, you were at Joe Biden's first speech since the election. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, he was keeping it positive.
You know, we're leaving behind the strongest economy in the world. I know people are still hurting, but things are changing rapidly. Together, we've changed America for the better. Now we have 74 days to finish the term, our term. Let's make every day count.
Yeah, it's undoubtedly a crushing blow for the Democratic Party. Was there a sense of that, I wonder, at the speech?
It was in the Rose Garden of the White House, and it was billed as an address to the nation. And, you know, those Rose Garden moments, they always carry huge gravity with them. They are always moments in themselves. And so the fact that he'd chosen this location showed that it was going to be a significant speech. A speech, of course, he clearly did not want to make. There were so many media there. Everyone had applied for credentials. In front of us were maybe 60, 70 chairs that had been set out where his staff had gathered. And it kind of felt like a bit of a farewell moment. At the back of the Rose Garden is a side door to the Oval Office. There was a Marine on the door. The door swung open. Out came President Biden, aviators on. And actually, with a spring in his step, he even broke into a little jog as he came out of the Oval Office towards the podium, which kind of surprised me. He didn't look broken. He looked like maybe almost relieved that this was the end of the fight. He had warm words for Kamala Harris. He said that she had the backbone of a ramrod, and he praised her for her campaign. Inside, did he really feel this? Well, I don't know. We may never know, because, of course, he always thought that he was the only person that could beat Donald Trump. He was forced to step aside, and then she went on to lose the election. What he didn't do was address any of the questions that certainly people in the Democratic Party have got, which is, if he had stepped down earlier, would that have changed everything? We'll never know that.
Martha, what about Kamala Harris herself? Do you think her political career is over now?
It's hard to see where it goes from here. I was at Howard University as she delivered that concession speech, and I was actually struck by what an optimistic sort of tone she struck. She was urging resilience among her supporters while offering them reassurance. And just as the sun was setting at Howard University, there were a group of black women who gathered in a small corner facing the stage where Kamala Harris had just delivered that speech, and they stood in a large circle, held hands and cried while singing hymns. It almost felt quite religious to observe, and these women were wearing the salmon pink and the apple green of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which is the same sorority that Kamala Harris was a part of. And I spoke to some of them afterwards, and some acknowledged that, maybe President Biden should have stepped aside sooner. Maybe she didn't have enough time to really assert her vision and her priorities for the nation on voters. But quite a few of them said to me that they believe that this result and the completeness of this result also says something about the deep-rooted misogyny and racism.
People are going to have critiques no matter what. Had she been more aligned, they would have critiqued. If she was completely on the other side of that, they would have critiqued.
We had expectations that women would stand up for themselves and our reproductive rights, and they didn't do it. And I guess that's the end of the story.
I think it shows that we're in a very hateful state right now, and people just need to wake up and smell the roses.
That struck me because we've now had 2 elections in 8 years where women, very qualified women, Kamala Harris was Attorney General of California, had a distinguished legal career, was a senator, has been a vice president, yet she was still beaten by a convicted felon who's been found civilly liable for sexual assault. So what does that say about this nation and its attitudes towards women? I don't know.
In a night of losses for the Dems, there were a few wins. We saw progressive voices like Rashida Tlaib and Ilham Omar re-elected. We saw the first trans person ever elected to Congress. Who now, Martha, are the new stars of the Democratic Party?
He's not a new star, but in California, where I live, Gavin Newsom is the governor, and he is straight out of central casting as far as politicians go. He's got this perfectly coiffed hair, gleaming white teeth, and is a very proficient public performer. He's known for his progressive policies on things like gun control and environmental issues, although interestingly, recently, and perhaps to widen his appeal, he's abandoned some of his more progressive political stances to appeal to swing voters. He's also trying to fix ongoing challenges like spiralling homelessness in California. I see it in Los Angeles and San Francisco. I think if you were to put a bet on who might be the next leader of the Democratic Party, or who at least will carry them into 2028, I think your money would probably go right now on Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, I actually grabbed a chat with Gavin Newsom just prior to the debate where it all went wrong for Joe Biden. He was one of the surrogates fielded by the Democratic Party. And he was running around this spin room, as they call it, beforehand. And I grabbed a quick chat. Because at that point, he was seen as the next big thing, possibly still is. Afterwards, when people realized the implications of Biden's poor performance, he was mobbed, swamped by journalists. And the question before the debate had been, at some point, will you take over? The question after Biden's gaffe was, why don't you take over now? Clearly, he fielded that with a straight bat, but there's no doubt he will be one of the front runners come decision time for who's next.
I do wonder, though, whether the problem with the likes of Gavin Newsom is that he will be seen as too left-wing. If there is one lesson for the Democratic Party in this election, it's that centrism works better than bleeding out towards the left. Kamala Harris was seen as being too liberal. Gavin Newsom, another person from California, also seen as pretty liberal. And I think the reformed Democratic Party might find itself needing to be more centrist in 4 years' time.
On immigration, we perhaps saw a little bit of that rightward shift from Kamala Harris during this election cycle. She'd arrived as vice president, Biden as president, determined to show more grace to people seeking access to the United States. But during this campaign, she was speaking of building the border wall, continuing fracking. There is also, I guess, a possibility of a dramatic swing to the left. Donald Trump has a lot of far-right policies that the country hasn't experienced in decades. Could that be enough to give a bit of an electric shock to people and therefore push the Democratic Party in the opposite direction? That is a possibility too.
Before we go, we've been all over this country in our coverage of the election. Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, you name it. I wonder, Martha and Mark, is there any memorable moment from the campaign trail? Something that gives you cause for a good chuckle when you look back?
Actually, there was something that happened the other morning, and I hope she'll forgive me for mentioning this. But the morning after the election, when we're all observing this bruising defeat for Kamala Harris, my producer, Sarah, texted me and very kindly said, "Can I bring you some breakfast in your hotel room?" And I said, "Oh, that'd be amazing." And she comes to grab something from my room, and she's wearing a Hotties for Harris t-shirt. And I should say, she's not one way or the other in terms of Harris Trump. She just happened to be given this t-shirt and was short of a pajama top, and she forgot to leave her room on the latch, and so the day after Kamala Harris's defeat, she was forced to go down to the lobby in a Hotties for Harris t-shirt to get a new key for her hotel room. And at a time when we were at a low ebb in terms of energy, having had just 2 hours sleep, that definitely gave me a laugh.
Very good. In terms of my life on the road, I mean, we have, without necessarily having belly laughs, we have regular chuckles along the way. We play first on the plane because we do so much travel, with due respect to fellow travellers and nobody breaking the law and no wrestling, no contact. We race to see who gets on the plane first, which can get a bit hairy at times. I might say I'm actually I'm one ahead on that particular contest.
Well, look, loads of funny moments, loads of fun moments. It's been a journey for sure. But one that sticks out is a young guy who we met on a basketball court in Georgia, and here's what he said to me.
Some people don't like it, but I think he's a smart businessman. Someone call him an a-hole, but I think he's an excellent a-hole.
That's it for today, and that's it for this series for now. But with a new Donald Trump presidency on the horizon, there's going to be no shortage of news from the United States. The three of us, myself, Mark and Martha, will be covering it all on Sky News on our website, and of course we'll be popping up on the Daily with Neil Patterson when he lets us. So until then, many thanks for listening, and we'll see you later.
End of the road, James.
Yeah, we've done it.
Oh, this feels quite emotional. But yeah, goodbye, and perhaps see you for On the Road in 2028.
Only 4 years to go.
Bye, Martha. Bye, James.
Cheers. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.